Hello and welcome to Train Signal. You are watching User and Group Accounts and Files. There are two sides to the life of a Linux administrator. There's the glamorous side, which involves things like testing and evaluating new software or hardware, installing upgrades, or like our Global Mantic staff, making a total environment change. This is the type of stuff that drew us to the technology field in the first place. But then there's the other side. The tasks that, though still important, don't provide quite the same thrill. One of those tasks is user and group management. Linux is the ultimate multi-user environment, and through its user accounts, each user can be provided with their own desktop environment, settings, and permissions. Linux user accounts are really quite similar to their Windows counterparts. So besides a few differences in commands and settings that we'll point out in the lesson, this material really should feel pretty familiar. In this lesson, we'll begin with an introduction to Linux users and groups. We'll then move on to creating and changing user accounts. Then we'll review the same information for groups. Let's start our overview on the next slide. Part of the responsibilities of my first job was help desk administration. And many a network engineer and administrator have started their careers just the same way. Since this was a shared responsibility at one specific workstation, many people in turn share the same computer. We never really ran into any problems with files on that system, as we each had our own workstations as well, but this setup illustrates the potential problem. Say I stored a file on the computer and someone else accidentally came along and deleted it. Someone could also quite easily overwrite the file. This situation could quickly turn the tide on what was a previously harmonious workplace. Luckily, thanks to user accounts, we no longer have to worry about this problem. A new user sitting at that same workstation would simply log on with their own account and have no access to other users' data. Linux uses a simple authentication method requiring a username and password. And on some systems, like my laptop, biometric technology like fingerprint scanners can also be used to log in. When deciding on a username scheme for your network, consider a few rules. Passwords are case sensitive, so vHenry with a lowercase v and vHenry with an uppercase V are treated as separate users. Also, usernames must begin with a letter, and they can contain symbols, though the space is one you probably shouldn't use. A common naming convention on networks is to have the first letter of the first name followed by the last name. But depending on the size of your network, you may run into duplicates with that approach. This is where the use of special characters and punctuation can come in handy. When a user account is created, the user is automatically assigned a user ID, and this information is stored in the file etc passwd. Let's switch over to a terminal window and take a quick look at this file. Let's launch a terminal window under Applications, System Tools, and Terminal. Also, if you've noticed, we have an additional listing of packages here from when we originally started, and that's because during our last lesson we added the KDE desktop environment, which added some new programs. So let's go ahead and open Terminal. And from here we're going to use the cat command to display the contents of a file. So just type in cat space etc passwd and hit enter. Now there's a bunch of information in this listing because it not only includes the users on the system, but also system users like root, bin, daemons, etc. But if we scroll down, we'll see here the vHenry user, and we also have Nancy, which we created as a test user in a previous lesson. Okay, let's switch back to the presentation and continue our review of user accounts. Once the Global Mantic's administrators have created all the new users for the new Linux network, initially, as users get used to the new system, they may find themselves spending a fair amount of time modifying and tweaking user accounts. Of course, there are graphical tools to handle account creation, but we'll focus on the command line because you'll need to be intimately familiar with this information for the Linux Plus examinations. The command to create a user account is user add, and the syntax is simply user add space options space username. And I will add that most of the time you may find yourself just using the user add followed by username command. But to review the options, first we have -C, which sets comments, and comments could typically be things like a full username, a phone number, maybe some department identifying information, essentially whatever you'd like to add here. -D specifies a different home directory. Now the default is usually home followed by username, but with this option you can set it to something different. -E sets the date that the account should be disabled in the format 4 characters for year, 2 for month, and 2 for date. -F for inactive days sets the number of days before an account becomes completely disabled. -G, lowercase g, for default group sets the name or group ID of the user's default group. Capital G, followed by group, sets the name of the group ID of one or more groups that a user belongs to. Continuing our look at the user add command's options, next we have -M. -M creates the user's home directory populated with files from etc/skel or SKEL. Now -M is the default option for the user add command, so typing in user add followed by the username invokes this option automatically. You don't have to type in the M. The next option is -P, which passes a pre-encrypted password to the system. Now this isn't one that you'll use very often, but it can be useful in scripts. Next we have -S, which sets the user's default login shell. And as we know, the current default is bin bash. Next we have -U, which sets up an account with a specific user ID. User IDs are normally started at 500 and they go up consecutively as you add users. And they're also unique normally. But if for some reason you need the same users to have the same user ID, then you can use the -O option, which allows reuse. Next we have -R, which creates a system account. And system accounts don't have home directories. And they also have lower user ID numbers, and those numbers are defined in etc login.defs. And finally we have -N, which disables group creation with the same name as the user. And this is a Red Hat Linux default. Now let's switch over to our terminal window and create a few test user accounts. Okay, let's first clear our screen so we have a clean slate to work with. And from the command prompt, we're going to type in the command which is most often used, which is just user add followed by the name of the user with no options. And I'm going to create a user called test user. So go ahead and hit enter. And you see that we have an error that popped up. The error says permission denied, and it's for the user add command. So what that means is that in order to create users, we have to have root privileges. So let's type in SU for switch user, hit enter, type in our root password, hit enter again, and now that we're logged in as root, we can go ahead and try the command. So let's type in user add space test user and hit enter. And once we have the command prompt back, we know that the account has been created. But after I started creating and deleting my own user accounts, my first question was, well, how do I get a listing of all the users on my system? First, let's try typing in the users command and hit enter. And as you can see, it only has one user listed here. But we know that we just created one, and we also created another user, Nancy, in one of our previous lessons. So what this tells us is that the users command only tells us about users that are currently logged in. So to get an entire listing, we have to use two commands. First, we're going to use cat, which will list the contents of a file, and the file that we need is etc PASSWD. Then we're also going to combine that with the grep command. It's the one that we covered in the GNU and Linux commands lesson. Grep searches for matches that contain a specified string. So let's go ahead and type in cat space etc PASSWD. And this is the file that contains all the user accounts. I'm going to add in another space. Then we're going to add in a pipe. And if you recall, pipe is the key that's above your enter key. And it's used to join commands. Another space, and then we're going to type in grep space, and in single quotes we're going to put /home. Now again, this command will search this file for any matches to home. And we're searching for home since all regular users will have a home directory. So let's hit enter. And now we can see the users that we have on the system, the regular users. We have my account, we have Nancy that we created previously, and test user that we just created. Now let's try out some of the parameters. First, let's type in user add space -u, which is going to set the user ID, if you recall. Let's try 600. Since we know the user IDs generally start at 5, we'll try something different. We'll say 600. And we're going to create a user named JDoe. So we've got the user add command, -u tells it to set the user ID for this user to 600. Let's hit enter. Now let's use our up arrow key to bring up the cat command that we just typed and hit enter. And we can see that our new user has been created with the appropriate user ID. Now what about the comments field? That could be useful for networks with a large number of users. So let's type in user add space -c for comments. Then we're going to type in user's full name. That might be useful. Thomas C. Smith. Feel free to use any name that you like. And we're going to add in the username, and I'm just going to make the username T. Smith. So again, we've got user add -c to indicate a comment follows, and then followed by the new username. Let's hit enter. And we got another error. And as you can see, when the error comes up, it presents you with all of the options for the command, which could also be quite useful. And have you guessed the problem with the command that we just typed in? Okay, let's go ahead and use the up arrow key. We're going to go back over, and we're going to type in some single quotes. So that indicates that we have a string. And let's hit enter. Okay, our command executed at that time. And let's use the up arrow key to go back to our cat command and hit enter. And we see that our new user, T. Smith, was created, and we've got the comment field here, Thomas C. Smith, as we indicated. Let's try another one. Let's add an account with an expiration date. Now this could be useful for contract employees that you know will leave on a certain day. So let's type in user add space -e followed by date. Again, we have to enclose it in quotes, single quotes. So I'm going to type in 2010. So the format is year followed by month followed by date. So we're going to say we have our contractors leaving Global Mantics 2010 at the end of December. So we'll say 12/31. Put in the ending quote, and we'll call this user Anthony Jones, A. Jones. So again, we've got user add with the -e to indicate the expiration date of the account, the date that we want it to expire, followed by the username. And hit enter. Let's use our up arrow key to get the cat command and hit enter. And again, we can see that our new user has been created. Now that's the way to do things from the command line. But while we're here, let's take a quick look at the graphical program equivalent. From the main menu, just click on System, Administration, and Users and Groups. You're going to have to type in your root password. And you can see the listing of users here right away that we just created. Then we have this option here to add a user. If you just click on that, let me bring that down a little bit. You can see here that you can enter the username, the user's full name, set up an initial password, change the default shell, create the home directory either in the default or one that you set, and then you have some ID information for user and for group. So as you can see graphically, things are probably a little bit easier, but there are times when you'll definitely need to use the command line. So let's go ahead and close that out. Now let's exit this and head back to the presentation where we'll talk about how to make changes to the accounts that we just created. A user account is created initially with no password. The -P option for user add, if you recall, only creates a not so useful pre-encrypted password. So after you create a user account, the next step is to set the password with the command passwd. The syntax is similar to user add. It's simply passwd followed by options followed by username. And the options are -K, which updates an expired account. And if you recall from the previous slide, the -E option used with user add sets the expiration date. -L locks an account. It does so by adding an exclamation point to the password in the file etc passwd. -U unlocks an account by removing the exclamation point. Then we have -F, which forces the creation of the account with no password. Then we have -D, which is used to remove the password. And finally, -S, which displays information about the password, like whether or not it's set and the type of encryption it's using. Let's head back to the terminal window and set passwords for all our new accounts. Now we should still be logged in as root, so from the command line, let's type in passwd space jdoe, our first user, and hit enter. Now the system will ask us to enter the new password. I'm going to type in jdoe. Now I know this isn't really good security protocol, but just for our testing purposes, bear with me. And hit enter. Now as you can see, Linux is also smart enough to say, hey, this isn't a good idea, it's too short and it's too simple. But I'm going to ignore Linux for the moment and retype in my password, jdoe, and hit enter. And it says all authentication tokens were updated successfully. Now let's see if the password was indeed set and what type of encryption it uses. So let's type in the command passwd space, we use the -S, capital S option if you recall, followed by the username, which is jdoe, and hit enter. And we see here that it says jdoe's password is set, and this is the encryption being used. Okay, let's go ahead and create passwords for our other test users. Let's type in passwd space tsmith, and that's our user Thomas C. Smith, the one that we created with the comment, and hit enter. So we're going to go ahead and put in tsmith. And it's saying again, hey, we don't like that password, but we're going to ignore it for the moment and type it in. Okay, now let's do one for our other user, A. Jones. Hit enter. Type any password you like. Confirm it by retyping and hit enter. Now let's try logging in as one of our new users. Go ahead and hit Control-Alt-F2. Now to log in as the new user, at the prompt all we have to do is type in the username. And I'm going to try JDoe and hit enter. It's going to ask for the password, and I'll enter our very simple password, JDoe, and hit enter. And we can see that we're now logged in as JDoe. Okay, now to get back to your screen, hold down Control, Alt, and F7. Okay, now let's go back to the presentation and talk about changing other aspects of user accounts. To change other options associated with user accounts, you use the command usermod. The syntax is similar to the other commands, and it's simply usermod space options followed by username. There are only three options with this command. The first is -m, which when used in conjunction with -d moves the user's home directory files. -l is used to change the user's login name. And -L and -U locks and unlocks a user's password respectively. Let's switch back to our terminal window and try out this command. Okay, so I've already cleared our terminal window, and I want to show you one other thing. Go ahead and hit Control-Alt-F2 again. Now when we were working on this screen before, we logged in as one of our test users. If you're still logged in, you want to make sure that you log out, because you can't make changes to the user if they're currently logged in. Well, I'll say you can make changes, but the changes might produce unpredictable results. So if you're logged in here, just go ahead and type in log out. And I'm already logged out, so I don't need to do that. But if you are, log out, and then go ahead and hit Control-Alt-F7 to go back. Okay, from here, let's go ahead and type in usermod space -L, because we're going to change one of our users' login names. And we're going to put in a new name. I'm going to type in JADoe, since our user John Doe now wants to use his middle initial. And we're going to end it with the current user's name. So we've got usermod -L. We're going to change JDoe to the new login name JADoe. So go ahead and hit enter. Let's say we also wanted to lock an account because we've seen some suspicious activity in our log files. So here let's type in usermod space -L followed by the username. And we're going to try A. Jones and hit enter. Now let's switch back by hitting Control-Alt-F2 to the login. Let's go ahead and try to log in as A. Jones. Type in A. Jones here and hit enter. And hit enter again. And it says login is incorrect. And that's because we can't log in. So let's go ahead and go back. Now let's take a look at the Etsy password file again. Let's see if that grep command is still here. Let's use the up arrow, go back a few, and there it is. So let's go ahead and hit enter here. And we can see now that our user has changed to JADoe here. Remember those Global Mantics contractors that we talked about earlier? Well, turns out that they'll be staying on longer than expected. So we need to change their account expiration options. You do that with the command CHAGE. You can set up accounts to automatically expire if the password hasn't been changed in a certain period of time, or if the system's date goes past the date or time that you set. The command syntax is CHAGE followed by options followed by username. The options start with -L, which is used to display account information about a specific user. Then you have -m, which sets the minimum number of days between password changes. With 0, you can change multiple times a day. With 1, you can change once a day. And with 2, you can change every 2 days, and so on. Dash capital M, or max days, sets the maximum number of days between password changes. Continuing our look at options for CHAGE, next we have dash D, or last day, which sets the last day a password was changed. Then we have dash capital I, or inactive days, which sets the number of days between account expiration and disablement. Then we have dash capital E, or expired date, which sets the account expiration date in the format 4 characters for year, 2 for month, 2 for day. And finally we have dash capital W, or warn days, which sets the number of days before expiration that the system will warn the user. Now you've probably seen this option if you've logged in and the system tells you you've got 10 days left to change your password. This is what the dash capital W option does. Now let's go back to our terminal window and give this command a try. Okay, first let's clear our terminal window. Now let's type in CHAGE and we'll try the dash E option to set the expiration date. Dash capital E, space, say 2010 /11/01. And the user that we'll do this for is T. Smith. Okay, so we've got CHAGE dash E followed by the date followed by the user. And hit enter. Now we'll use the dash L option to display account information for T. Smith. So we'll type in CHAGE space dash L space T. Smith and hit enter. And we can see that the account expiration date has indeed been set to November 1st, 2010. Okay, let's head back to the presentation and move on to the account configuration files on the next slide. Over the last several slides, we've covered the commands that you can use to make changes to user accounts. But you can also modify them directly via the etc passwd file. The syntax for the file is as follows. The first field is for username, and you see that's Tommy. The second field is for passwords. And if you're using an encrypted or shadow password, you'll see an X here in this field. The next field is the user ID, again starting at 500 usually. Then we have the group ID, followed by the comment field, which can include again things like the user's full name or essentially any information that you want to include. Then you have the home directory, which is again usually home followed by the user's name, unless you indicate something differently. And then last you have the default shell, which is bin bash. Let's take another look at a live etc password file again. Let's go back to the terminal. Okay, let's clear the window so we can have a clean slate again. Then we're going to type in cat space etc passwd and hit enter. Let's concentrate along the bottom here. And we can see that we have, for some of the users that we created, we've got the username, J.A. Doe, X, which indicates an encrypted password. We've got 600 for the user ID and also 600 for the group ID. You see the colon here, that indicates that we don't have anything in the comments field. Then we have the home directory and followed by bin bash, the default shell. Again, you'll notice each of these is colon separated, and when you see the double colon, that means that we don't have any information in that particular field. Okay, let's continue our look at this with the etc shadow file on the next slide. Again, if you're using password encryption on your network, you should have an etc shadow file. This file will also contain one colon separated line for each user on your system. The first field is also for username. The second field will contain the encrypted password. The next field contains the last password change. The next is the number of days until a change is allowed, followed by the number of days before a change is required. warning days before expiration, then the number of days between expiration and deactivation, and the last two fields are expiration and a special flag field. Let's go back to our terminal window and take a look at our Etsy shadow file. Okay, from here, let's type in cat space Etsy shadow and hit enter. Let's take a look at the last line here for J.A. Doe. Again, J.A. Doe is the username. Then we've got an encrypted password here, followed by, if it's set, the last password change date. Then we've got the number of days before a change is allowed, days before the change is required, any warning day setting before expiration, followed by days between expiration and deactivation, and we've got the last field for the actual expiration date or special flag. And again, if you see the colons here with no options, that means that this particular user doesn't have any of those options set. Now this is a file that you probably won't want to directly modify very often. Also, let's take a look here. If you look at user A. Jones and you see the exclamation point in front of the encrypted password, if you recall, we actually locked this user, so that's why you see the exclamation point here. And we did that with the usermod -L command. Let's go up and take a look at some of the other users on the system. Here's one that's Ben. If you see an asterisk, that indicates that this is a system account. So we know how to create a user and how to modify their settings. But what if we wanted to remove a user from the network? To delete a user, you use the command userdel or userdel. The syntax is userdel space options space username. And there are only three options. The first is -R or /remove, which removes all files from the user's home directory and mail spool. Since deleting without this option will leave all of those files intact. The next is -F or /force, which forces deletion while the user is logged in. If you recall with the usermod command, we talked about some of the potential issues with making changes to user accounts while they're logged in. And while a user is logged in, you can't normally delete them, so you need to use the -F option to do so. Then we have -H or /help, which lists all of the userdel options. Now let's go back to our terminal window and try to delete one of our test users. Okay, first I'm going to clear the screen. Now I'm going to type in userdel with no options for test user and hit enter. Now let's type in ls space /home and hit enter. As we can see, even though we deleted the user, his home directory still exists. So if we want to delete a user and their home directory and mail spool, we use the -R option. So let's type in userdel space -R space, and we'll pick on T. Smith and hit enter. Let's try that cat command again. We'll type in cat space Etsy PASSWD space pipe space grep, and we're going to search for the home directories and hit enter. And we should see now that our user T. Smith is gone. Let's try to look in the home directories again. Using the up arrow, we can go back to the command and hit enter, and we can see that also T. Smith's home directory has indeed been deleted. Now let's go back to the presentation and talk about groups. At Global Mantics, we have several departments, a few of which are accounting, developers, and administrators. To help organize users, you can put them into groups. And you can use groups to give them access to the same resources so they won't have to be configured individually. Consider a developers group that currently has 100 members. Now you can assign access to programs, directories, and other resources to this group and simply add users to the group, instead of individually going to 100 user accounts and setting up the individual permissions and access there. The command to add a group is simply group add, and the syntax is group add space options followed by group name. Though you probably won't often use the options, they are -G, which specifies a group ID, and like user IDs, these are usually unique, but if you want to share them, you need to use the -O option. Then you have the -R option, which creates a group ID of less than 500. Now this option is supported on Red Hat, but not many other distributions. Then you have -F, which forces creation of a group with an existing name. Let's go back to our terminal window and create a few groups. Since you'll normally use group add without any options, let's try that first. Type in group add space, we'll start out with accounting. And hit enter. Now let's try the group add with the -G option to specify a group ID. Group add space -G, let's make it 680. Space, and the name of the group we'll create as developers. And hit enter. Now just like users, groups have a file that contains all the information. So let's type in cat space etc, and the name of that file is group. And hit enter. And you can see at the bottom here that we have the two accounts that we just created. Accounting with the group ID of 603 and developers with the 680 group ID that we specify. You can see some other groups here, mainly system groups. Things that you normally won't have to worry about. Okay, let's go back to our presentation and find out how to modify our groups. So we've created our groups, but find that we need to make a quick change. You use the command group mod to do so. The group mod options are -G for group ID to change the group ID. Then you have -N to specify a new group name. Also, you use the user mod command to add users to a group. The syntax is user mod -G followed by the name of the group followed by the username. Let's test this out at our terminal window. First, let's try adding a user to a group with the command user mod space -G space the name of the group, which is developers, and we'll use user JA Doe and hit enter. Now let's type in cat space etc space groups and hit enter. Whoops, it's supposed to be group. Let's use our up arrow and hit enter. And we can see that JA Doe has been added to our developers group. Now let's change the name of our accounting group. Let's type in group mod space, we needed the -N space new group name, and then we'll put in the old name and hit enter. Now let's use the up arrow key to bring up the cat command again and hit enter, and we see that our group name has been changed. Now let's take a look at this graphically. Go on System, then Administration, and Users and Groups. And if we click on the Group tab here, we can see the groups that we have. We see the ones that we've created, Accounting and Developers. You can add a group by clicking on the Add Group parameter and specifying the name of the group and the group ID if you want. And if we double click on one of our groups, again we can change the name here, and we can add users to the group by just clicking on. Okay, let's go back to our presentation and take a look at group passwords. So we've learned how to create a group and also how to modify it. But what if we wanted to make additional changes to our groups? To add a password to a group, for instance, you use the command gpasswd. The syntax should look pretty familiar by now. It's command name options group, or gpasswd space options space name of the group. And oddly enough, the same command also allows you to change other group settings through the use of options. The options are, starting with -a, user, which adds a user to a group. Then you have -d, user, which deletes a user from a group. Then you have -R, which disallows the creation of new users using the command new group, or NEWGRP. Then you have -A, which specifies group administrators. And finally, -M, user, which is like -A, which adds administrators, but this option also adds the administrators to the list of group members. Let's try these out back at the terminal window. First, let's add a user to one of our existing groups. Let's type in gpasswd space -a for add a user, followed by the user's name, and then followed by the group. I'm going to add them to the developers group. And hit enter. And it came back and told us that it's adding the user to the developers group. Let's take a look at the group file again to make sure that the change was applied. Choose the up arrow and hit enter on cat etc group. And as we can see, developers now has A. Jones in addition to J.A. Doe. Now let's say we've made a mistake and A. Jones is just not a developer. We want to remove him from that group. Let's type in gpasswd space -d for remove a user, followed by the user's name, followed by the group, developers, and hit enter. Comes back and tells us that it's removing the user. Now let's use the cat command again, up arrow twice, and hit enter. And we can see again that developers is here and A. Jones has indeed been removed. Let's finish up on the next slide with a look at how to delete groups. Let's say that Global Mantics has decided to hire an outside accounting firm and they no longer need an internal accounting group. To remove that group, you use the command groupdel. The syntax is groupdel, GROUPDEL, space group name. You can also make this change directly in the file etc group. Let's go back to our terminal window and take a quick look at this. Okay, from the prompt, let's type in GROUPDEL space followed by the group name, and let's try our accounting group as we indicated, ACCT, and hit enter. Let's use the cat command again, up arrow twice, and there it is, and hit enter, and we can see now that that group is gone. And we can also take a quick look at this graphically. Click on System, Administration, Users, and Groups. Type in our root password and hit enter. And if we go to our group listing, again we see that our accounting group is gone. And that concludes our lesson on user and group accounts and files. Let's review what we learned on the next slide. In this lesson, we talked about the very important task of managing users and groups on your networks. And while there are graphical tools that you may find yourself using more often, the command line tools are indispensable. and the Linux Plus certification exams also focus on these tools. To recap what we learned, we started out with an introduction to Linux users and groups, then moved on to how to create and modify accounts for both users and groups. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.